In this lecture, we'll be going over the 3D viewport options. Now we'll be going over these three menus up here. We have object types visibility, we have viewport gizmos, and we have viewport overlays. And if we press the N key for the right side toolbar here, we'll also be going over some of the view options in the view tab here. But let me press N to get rid of that toolbar. We're going to go with the top menus first. So we'll start off with object types visibility. Now this is pretty self-explanatory. You have visibility toggles for all the different types of objects in your scene. For example, if you didn't want to see any cameras, you can disable their visibility like that. And there's also some options here for selectability. So if, for example, you didn't want to be able to select your camera, you can turn off selectability for that. And you can see as I left click over it, we can't select it. So that will make sure that we don't accidentally select anything that we want to keep in place. So let me re-enable that. And that pretty much does it for that menu there. It's pretty self-explanatory. And let's go over to viewport gizmos now. Now gizmos are just extra visual controls for different tools and options. For example, if I select the cube there and I switch over to the move tool, you can see the move gizmo pops up. And with this gizmo, we can just click on any one of these arrows and it's going to move the cube along that axis. So that's the gist of what gizmos are. So this menu here just allows you to enable or disable those visual controls if you want to. For example, the navigate control or the navigate gizmo over here allows you to control the view that you're in. I use the hotkeys for this, so I do like to disable that to give myself some more room to work with in the 3D view. But you can also go into the edit menu down to user preferences, and in the viewport tab, you can change the 3D viewport axis from the interactive one to just a simple style one, which I rather like. So I'm going to leave it set to that. And that just doesn't allow us any interactive control up here, but it does give you a visual of how your scene is rotated, which can be useful. Now, I really don't like looking at any of the gizmos. I use the hotkeys for everything. It's better for workflow that way. So I'm going to keep this set to the select tool. And if I want to move things around on an axis, I don't need the gizmo. I can just press G and then press X to move it along the X axis if I want to, or the Z axis. So I'm going to use the hotkeys for that. There's also a main toggle for all the gizmos. You can press this button right here to turn them all off or turn them all back on again. And that about covers it. So let's move on now to the viewport overlays. This is a set of options for displaying lots of different information in the viewport. This menu has extra options for edit mode as well, but for this lecture we'll stick with using it in object mode, and we'll use the other options in edit mode as needed throughout the course. So let's start off with the guide section here. Let me press numpad 1 for front view, and let me open that menu again. Now I can turn off the grid completely if I wanted to, and if I rotate the view, you can see we can still see the floor of the world there. I can actually turn that off by turning off floor, and then I can turn off the axes as well. And I actually find it useful to keep them all turned off, because as you can see when you rotate the view, I'm not really using the grid that much, but it is intersecting my objects, which kind of obscures things sometimes. So I do like to keep all of these turned off. But we still have the grid when we're in a regular orthographic view. Now let me press numpad 1 for front view, and we'll go back into that menu, and the scale option here just increases or decreases the scale of the grid. And subdivisions here is for the grid as well. You can change the number of times the larger grid blocks are subdivided. And we went over this in the units and measurements lecture as well. Now the text info here is just the information at the top left here. And you can hide the 3D cursor if you want to, and any annotations you might have drawn as well. Now we have some object visibility options down here. The extras options deals with anything like cameras and lights. If you turn that off, they become invisible. Relationship lines are for any objects that have a connection between each other. For example, if I parent one object to another so that the one object follows the other, it also creates this relationship line to let us know there's some kind of connection between the two. And we can turn off those lines if you don't need to visualize them by turning off relationship lines. And outline selected is pretty self-explanatory. That will just create an orange outline around the objects you have selected. And we have some other visibility options here like bones. If you're using armatures, you can turn them off here. Motion paths are something to do with animation. We'll get into that later. And origins here, you can turn them off if you need to for whatever reason. And if you want all origin points to be visible, like for example, you can see how this isn't selected, so its origin point is not visible. If we want it to be, we can tick origins all, and we'll be able to see all the origins for all the objects regardless if they're selected or not. Now let me add in a mesh monkey head here and move it up out of the way. Let's go back into the menu and enable wireframe. What that's going to do is draw all the edges of your model on top of solid shading. So that's pretty helpful for visualizing your topology. Now let's move on to face orientation, which is going to show you the direction of your faces. This is important because a face can point either outward or inward. You'll typically want them all to be pointing outward for various reasons that we'll get into throughout the course. But I just want to show you how you can visualize the direction of the face using this mode here. So let me go into edit mode, and I'll select 4 of these vertices, thus selecting that face there. And I'll press Alt and N, and I'll flip those normals, which is simply the direction of the face. You can see it turns red. So that's telling us that this face here is pointing inward instead of outward. So we know we have a problem because we have this mode enabled and one of those faces is red. And to fix that, I'll select all the faces and press Shift and N to recalculate the normals, which means it's making all the faces point outward. So you can see that one turns blue, which means this face is now pointing outward and everything is good to go. And again, we'll get into more normal stuff throughout the course as needed. But that is a very useful mode for figuring out if you have any face direction problems. Now, motion tracking here, it's not something I'm going to go over now. I'll be going over that in some extra content after the course is published. But for now, that actually does it for all those different options. Now, one other thing is that there's a master toggle right here, which will completely disable all the viewport overlays and just show you your models. And that's actually really helpful because it's going to get rid of anything that's not part of your final render, like cameras or lamps or the grid or anything that's just not going to be part of that final picture or animation. So it's just a good way to help you visualize how the scene's going to look without all that extra crap. And there's a hotkey for that as well. You can hold Shift, Alt, and Z, and you can toggle that on and off. Now if I select one of the objects and go into edit mode and go back into this menu, you can see we have this whole mess of other options in edit mode. And these get a little bit more complex, so we'll go over these options more as needed throughout the course, but I won't be going over them in this lecture. Now let me get out of edit mode and I'll press the N key for the right side toolbar because like I mentioned, we have some extra view options in this tab right here. First, let me turn off face orientation here and zoom in a little bit. Now the top 3 options here deal with the view in the viewport here. If I decrease focal length, it adds more perspective to the scene and things become a little bit more extreme in terms of perspective. And if I were to increase this to say 120, then things become more orthographic. There's not as much perspective. But let's keep that set at, what was it, 50 I think is a good default. Now the viewport actually has a distance range and it's called clipping. And here we have a clip start and a clip end. If anything is further than 1,000 meters, it doesn't get rendered. If anything is closer than 0.1 meters, it doesn't get rendered. For example, if I zoom into this monkey head here, when I reach a certain point, it starts to not render those faces right in front of me. So the camera starts going through it. Now this can be a pain in the butt sometimes because if I wanted to get real close to this point here and it starts disappearing on me, well then I can't really edit that point. So what we can do though is turn clip start down to 0.01 instead, and that way we can get a little bit closer to that point before it starts to disappear and go through the monkey head. And it's actually really useful to turn clip start down. At least I've found in my experience it's been useful because I'll often get real close up to very fine details and the camera just starts going through it. So I'll need to change the clip start to be something lower. And clip end is the same concept. If you have a scene that's really large and the camera's not rendering anything past 1,000 meters, but you want it to, then you can increase this amount here as well. Now the camera options right here just allow you to choose what camera you want active in your scene. For example, if I select that, duplicate it and move it over, then I can click on use local camera, and instead of using the active camera that's already been set as the main camera, we can click on that menu and choose another camera from in here. So now it's switched it over to this camera, and if I press numpad 0 to go into camera view, you can see we're using that camera now. You can also switch cameras by selecting one and pressing Control and numpad 0, but we're going to get into camera stuff later in the course. We're also going to get into render stuff later in the course, so the render region option here I'm just going to skip in this lecture. Now the view lock options down here are pretty cool. These have to do with rotating the scene. For example, we can lock the scene rotation to an object. So I'll click on that eyedropper and click on that cube. Now anytime I rotate the scene, you can see it rotates around that cube. So that cube becomes the center of the rotation world. All right, let me X out of that. And I'll enable lock to 3D cursor now. And same concept, wherever the 3D cursor is where the scene's going to rotate around. And lock camera to view here is the most useful tool here. Let's say I press numpad 0 to go into camera view, and I want to get a good shot of all the objects. So what I'll have to do is press G to move the camera, and then R to rotate it, G to move it again, and then press G and middle click to zoom out a little bit. If I were to say just try to rotate the view by middle clicking and dragging, it takes us out of camera view. But what you can do is go into camera view and choose lock camera to view. That way now we can actually middle click and drag the view, and it rotates the view around like normal, and we can even shift and middle click and drag to pan the scene. And what it's doing is it's moving the camera to match those motions. So this helps you really fine tune your perfect camera view. So that's actually a really useful option. Just make sure you disable it after you're done using it so that you don't accidentally move the camera view when you go to rotate the view itself. Alright, so that's going to do it for the rundown of most of the viewport options. So that's going to do it for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one.